Hello, everyone, and welcome to this B2 Lead conversation. Today, we have an amazing guest. We have the great pleasure and honor to have Ocansey here with us. Oma is the UK head of diversity and inclusion at BNP Paribas. Oma, welcome and thank you for being here to have this conversation and sharing your story. It is really an honor and a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much, Barbara. It's real pleasure to be here. Very excited.
It is exciting to be here for me too, also because we get to hear what is, I'm sure, an amazing story. And you know what, Emma? I would actually like you to introduce yourself, if that's okay.
Absolutely. As Barbara has mentioned, my name is Ocansey. I'm the UK Head of Diversity and Inclusion for BNP Paribas, an investment bank. I started my career at a law firm, an international law firm, and worked in London, Tokyo, and New York. And then I subsequently moved to the investment bank, BNP Paribas, where I focused on capital markets and particularly emerging markets. My background is that I was raised in Ghana, and then I came over to the UK later on in childhood. And so I've always had an interest in developing markets and developing economies, which is why I focused on emerging markets as a capital markets lawyer. I then moved on to become the head of diversity and inclusion in November 2020, so right in the height of COVID and lockdown. So I've had quite an interesting and challenging path into diversity and inclusion, because it was a very heightened time to be involved in this area. And personally, I'm a mum, I'm married, I'm a daughter, I have 4 siblings, and I live and reside in the UK.
What an amazing story that you have already so far of who you are. Lots of achievements and for sure a lot of lessons that you can share with us. And the first question that I have for you, Emma, is where you are today where you have always wanted to be, or it just happened that life took you where you are today? You come from Ghana, you moved to the UK, you have worked in different countries that you just mentioned. Was this a strategy? Was this something that you wanted to do in the way you did it, or life planned it and it just happened?
I think it's a combination of both, actually, in the sense that situations happened. We got posted here because my dad was a diplomat. So situations or events happened and opportunities occurred, and I was sort of part of that. And I also think that it's also about taking opportunities as well. So if I think high level, professionally and personally, I've achieved quite a lot. And there's lots of things that I wanted to do as a child. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to travel. I wanted to sort of see the world. And I felt that I've done that. But my core reason for being a lawyer is that I actually wanted to help people. I wanted to make a difference. And I felt that if I could empower people and help them understand their civil rights and their human rights and their legal rights, I could sort of change the world. I ended up in capital markets, so finance. So it was more about helping organizations than individuals. But I do think that my current role in diversity and inclusion is really amplifying the voice of the marginalized and the people that are not represented, and they're not always the majority. In fact, they never are. And so I sort of feel that I'm the person that I was always going to end up as, with a little bumps, with a little light, with some darkness, and with lots of opportunities. And I've taken some, and I've missed some, and I've regretted some, and I've been thankful that others I haven't sort of taken. And so it's just a combination of things that sort of made me who I am. But all in all, I'm pretty happy with where I am. There's obviously more to do, both professionally and personally. So I haven't stopped yet. And hopefully I will be able to achieve those things as much as possible.
Amazing. That's wonderful. And from the position where you are today, where you have achieved so much indeed, and you look back, can you identify some moments that you could consider sliding door moments, decisions that actually made a difference and determined the direction of your life and career, where you made certain choice and took certain opportunities instead of others, and you were aware that that would have been a very important moment for you? If you look back from where you are,
Yeah.
can you identify few of these moments? Because, and the reason I'm asking is because maybe there are other women and other people that are in moments where I don't know what to do, this is good, this is great, how do you decide, how do I move forward? And so I would love to hear, what did you do in those key moments that I'm sure you had in
Yeah. Actually, one of them, which I was speaking about yesterday to our summer graduate program intakers, is that I decided to do law, and it was extremely competitive because I wanted to work for an international law firm. And I remember I was sort of doing the standard thing of making applications and not really getting very far, or getting interviews but not progressing to receiving an offer. So I just thought outside of the box, and I volunteered at the Law Society. And that gave me the opportunity to sort of learn more about law firms, get and have access to lawyers who were in these law firms, have discussions. And it just meant that when I started reapplying, I could actually say that I'd worked at the Law Society. Obviously enhanced what I was doing, but it also gave me something to talk about. So I think thinking outside the box, especially in moments when things are not really going well or not going the way you want, it is always a good strategy to approach. And another key moment, which I think really changed not only my life actually, but I can also say my brother's, is that when I was a trainee, I was desperate to have a seat in New York because I had family there. And when the rotations came around, I didn't get in New York, and I was offered Tokyo, Japan. And I was really disappointed because I didn't know anybody in Japan. I didn't really have any sort of connections in Asia. It wasn't really a part of the world that I was high on my list to visit. And I kind of took it quite badly. And then I consulted, and I think this is when you need mentors and you need people who are sort of ahead of you and sort of in life. And everybody sort of turned around and said, when are you going to get to go to an amazing place like Japan? And have the full security of a job, accommodation, and just be free to explore and learn about a completely different culture. And I took that advice, and it was the best decision because it taught me to be brave. It taught me to take risk, and it taught me to understand that what you can't miss what you've never taken. And so it was better to do it and almost regret it and say, well, that was, the worst thing that ever happened, it was awful, than not to have taken it at all and then have the constant, well, what would have happened if I did? And sort of subsequently, my brother came to visit, and he also fell in love with Japan, and he now currently works there, and he's been there for 18 years. So my decision also changed my career. And also changed his as well. And having worked in a big office, the Tokyo office was a lot smaller, and it gave me the opportunity to sort of own more responsibility, have more access to clients, really kind of understand how an office operates. So again, take risk. Sometimes your first choice may not be the best choice, and if there is a second choice, do consider that, because everything is an adventure. And like you say, it's better to have taken a path that you experienced rather than not have taken that at all and live with regrets or doubts.
That's fascinating, and it is so powerful. So what I've heard you saying is, first of all, think outside the box. Think outside the box because even if the results you're looking for and what you have planned doesn't happen, you need a plan B, and plan B often is outside the box. So
Absolutely.
what you did with the volunteering is amazing. I think it's a great suggestion and advice for those who keep staying in the same box, and you are saying, no, I started thinking outside the box and I actually got my opportunity. But then what happened as well, you are saying, I wanted in New York, I got Japan. And so if it was just for you, that would have been a disappointment. And
Absolutely.
what do I do to go to New New York. But what you are saying and what you are telling us is a great approach to what happens to you is be open, take risks, have mentors and trust them, and just give it a try, because you do not know what you do not know, really.
Absolutely.
And also let me point out this one, that I love what you said about your brother, that we do not know. And your story tells us that when we accept to trust people that we admire as mentors, we give ourselves a chance with what we did not choose, but perhaps might be better for us. People around us might also benefit from our choices. And so it expands the opportunity and the goodness. That's incredible. That is incredible.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I think another sliding door moment was actually being asked to take on this role. And the reason why I found a sponsor is because I did a lot of activities in networks. So it was the top of my day job. And it was something that I was generally interested in and I wanted to change. And by doing that, it gave me exposure not only to the people in my immediate circle of work, but it gave me exposure to other people and actually helped me get a sponsor. And a lot of people say to me, well, how do you find a sponsor? And I always say, it's quite challenging because your sponsor almost wants to know you. And unless it's somebody that you work with or is immediately managing you in some way, it's quite difficult. So I think a good tip is to do something on top of your day job, get involved in networks, get involved in projects that are transversal, and really expand your network at work, because that's how people will see you. And if you do a good job, people will remember you. And it's almost better if you don't work for them, because they're more likely to think about you because you would have made an impression, because they're not somebody that you're not somebody that they would have seen on a day-to-day basis.
That's fantastic. And what would you say if somebody is taking your advice as you took those of your mentor? And perhaps somebody would say, well, but I'm shy. I am not so outgoing. I don't feel so secure, or I have some doubts. What would you tell these maybe younger ladies that are starting their careers and yet they are ambitious, and as you did before, they also want to change the world and they want to contribute? What would you suggest them to do if they find themselves with some doubts and they don't know how to actually go out there and expand their network and be bold and maybe introduce themselves in order to have more exposures? What would you recommend them to do?
I always say, firstly, trust yourself, because if you don't back yourself, nobody else will. Don't ever self-edit. Don't ever think that you don't have the skill sets or you're not able to do something. Try. And I've sort of had a phrase that I've developed in the last few years is say yes to everything and figure things out afterwards. So sometimes somebody will ask you to work on something, or somebody will ask you to attend something or do something, and it may not be, or it may not fit in with what your plans are. But say yes and then try and figure it out later. And what that does is that it gives you the opportunity to really think things through. And I think a lot of time women just self-edit. Women just say, oh, I can't do this, or I don't believe that I can, or I don't trust myself. And again, if you don't believe in you, no one else will. So I don't think you have to be the loudest person in the room. I don't think you have to be the most confident or gregarious person in the room. I think you have to believe in you. And whatever that looks like, if you show up believing in you, other people will believe in you.
That is so powerful, and I think it is really so good for people to hear it, for women to hear that I would dare to ask you if you have a moment that you can share where you realize that actually I am believing in myself and I go for it. Do you have an example that you can share of that very moment, what was going on outside of you and in you, so that you could believe in yourself and that made a difference for you?
I think actually when I was asked to consider this role, I'd been a lawyer for a long time. I was comfortable, I was good at it. And when this opportunity came up, I sort of thought, well, this is sort of HR land, this is people land. I'm a transactional lawyer. I'm very much at comfort with sort of structures, documentation, solving problems, analyzing problems. I'm not really sure if I'm sort of this sort of person. And then I thought to myself, do you know what? If you're able to have done all of that, you can transfer those skill sets and you can learn. And so, you know, with time and with thought, and again, I have a sort of my own board of mentors, friends, and family who I consult with. I just thought, you know what, I'm going to try this. And it sounds sort of flippant, but I thought, what's the worst that can happen? You know, you don't do a great job, and then you learn that actually diversity and inclusion isn't for you, and you move on and do something else. But at least you would have tried it. And I always had the thought in the back of my mind that I've lived this experience. I've lived being othered. I've lived being marginalized. And so I can bring that experience, and hopefully the other skill sets I will learn. And I think if you're open to learning, if you're open to actually being vulnerable, I'm sometimes when I'm in meetings with HR and they start going off on smart wording and they start talking about very HR land, I'm not embarrassed to say, well, actually, what does that mean? Or explain it to me. Or I think I know what you're saying, but could you sort of fine tune that? And I think when you're vulnerable, when you're open, and when you're direct about things, it just means that you are able to learn and you're able to pick things up.
That is so powerful, Amma, because what I hear saying is basically that the moment when you believe in yourself, of course, is when you were able to give value to what you already did.
Mm-hmm.
You were able to see and recognize and acknowledge yourself for what you did, and recognize also that you can learn, you
Mm-hmm.
can be vulnerable, and that are people around that you can collaborate with as mentors, right? And all of these doesn't need to be perfect. And I think that for women, it is something that sometimes is difficult to think that we are not perfect. And what you're saying is open to learn, open to be vulnerable, and ask questions, not pretending that I know everything, even if I am the UK head, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes our position, we think that we are supposed to know everything in that particular role, whereas there is this simplicity of simply, I am learning, I am still
Exactly.
growing, right? And
Yeah.
since that this is what we want to become comfortable with.
Yeah. And a mentor of mine said, intelligence isn't knowing everything, it's asking the right questions. And I strongly believe in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this is exciting at the same time, right? We don't,
Yeah.
it is liberating. We don't need to know everything, but we can learn to ask questions so that we can learn what we need to learn. That's wonderful. Thank you. I will keep thanking you throughout the entire conversation. And if you look back again, and if you look at key challenges
Mm.
that you encounter on your path, what would those challenges be, and how did you overcame them?
I think, you know, sometimes people don't believe in your abilities or they challenge your qualification. And my intersection as a Black woman has often meant that I've often been the only woman in the room, but always the only Black woman in the room. And so I've often been marginalized and not listened to. And it's just working through that. And sometimes it's difficult, you know, sometimes you sort of just think, why do I have to add this on top of everything else? But unfortunately, that is how the world is structured. And so it's very much just persevering, believing in you, and having the confidence. And sometimes, if you don't, gaining it from your surroundings, right, your friends and your mentors and the people that you work with, that you are able to do that, and you are able to do this, and there's a reason why you're in the room. And as I said, believing in it and acting upon it. And those are the moments that you really need to be resilient. I think that's one thing that my career has taught me, is that you have to be resilient, because there are not always great days, and there are some days that are quite dark and quite bad. And it's just actually thinking, well, what am I learning in this stage? What is actually going on with me here? And coming out of the other side and saying, well, okay, sometimes there's no lesson to be learned. It was just an awful experience, and you know, it's best not remembered. But other times there are lessons to be learned, and taking on those lessons and moving on with those, and preparing yourself or equipping yourself or putting in that in your resilience bank, so that next time when something like that happens, or something you see something similar, you know how to behave, or if not how to behave, how to ensure that that person or that or whatever is happening doesn't make you feel bad or in a certain way.
And this is must have been a very powerful lessons as well, because if you take us there in one of these rooms where you were the only Black woman there, surrounded by men, leaders, and if I think of you in Japan on top of it, right, as a culture for women in business in a position of power is a difficult and challenging situation to be there. So if we are there with you in that room, when you say, I didn't feel listened to, right? What was happening within you when you realize that, oh, look, these guys, they are not listening to me. You are talking about resilience, being confident. You're talking about acting on what you believe you're capable of and you can do. So if you take us there for a moment, in that moment where you realized I'm not listened to, what did you actually thought and did in those moments? Was it just acknowledging, realizing that, and then say, well, what did you do there? Take us there for few minutes.
It's definitely acknowledging that, and then telling yourself that you are here for a reason. And then to keep ploughing on and to ask the question and say, well, actually, can we address this question that I've asked? Can we just go back to that point? Maybe you didn't hear what I said, but just to repeat that. And it takes a lot of confidence, and it's almost an out-of-body experience, because at the time when you're doing it, you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh. But again, there's a reason why you're there. And if you don't speak up, if you don't make yourself known, then you're almost letting other people confirm that, you know, you shouldn't really be there and you shouldn't be listened to. So it's almost just plowing through that and just thinking there's a reason why I'm here. And it's often because I want to do a good job, and it's often because I want to understand the situation. And you have to keep plowing on and keep going.
That's beautiful. So what you did, it was naming what actually was happening. Guys, you're not listening, not directly, but maybe you didn't send the question. So don't let that moment pass without acknowledging that it is happening. It seems like that's what you did. And so you kept going and you kept pushing to have your question addressed. And so you don't let it pass as if it did not exist that moment. And it seems from what you're saying, then I keep trusting myself and I keep standing up for myself. That is so powerful. Did I get it right?
Yeah, no, absolutely, you did. You did.
That's wonderful. So I think it will be so useful to so many women that sometimes we do not share those moments, right? I'm not listened to, and we tend to just shrink. Even if we are in a boardroom, right?
Yeah.
And what you are inviting us to do is don't do that. Stay there, stand tall, and speak up for yourself, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you said about naming it is important, because once you name it, it actually allows you to see the problem, and then you can move on. I think the problem happens when you can't name it, or you're in trauma, or you're so sort of out of sync that you can't really think clearly. And that has happened, don't get me wrong. I didn't start off naming things, being resilient and going and being persistent. Of course, there were times when things threw me, or people said something, or I was ignored, and I just couldn't quite figure out what was happening. But with time and with experience, you learn to name it. And I completely think that whole naming, recognizing what's happening, empowers you then to know how to handle it and how to move forward.
And would you say that this ability and these skills, because these are skills that you learn in time, the mentors, you spoke about the board of mentors and family members and friends perhaps that accompanied you in your journey, would you say that this board of people, this group of people helped you developing these skills? And would you recommend everybody to have a board of mentors, and how did you find the people that belong to this group for you?
Definitely, people have helped, and don't think that a board means you have to have lots of people. It could be as small as 2 to 3, but I've always picked people along the way who are very different to me and think very differently. And so with analysis, maybe you'd have a situation and then you'd go back and say, this is what happened, what do you think? And then have that person say, well, actually, I agree with you, or I see it differently, or have you thought about that? And that really allows you to see things from a very broad perspective. And so it kind of puts you in a position where you kind of think that, okay, I was in this situation, it could be this, it could be that. And now that I see it, I may not be able to pinpoint it clearly, but what I can control is how I behave. And then that allows you to determine the way you react. And there's a very famous saying that people treat you the way you let them. So it's very much about you stating your position so that people understand and know how you want to be treated. And back to the point about having a board, like I say, it doesn't have to be a vast amount of people, but if you try and choose and connect with people who are different from you, who think differently from you, then they can advise, they can challenge you, they can bring you broader perspectives. And I just think it helps. And actually, this ties into the whole point about having diversity. Right? You don't want the people to surround people. You don't want to surround yourself with people who think exactly like you, because they're not bringing anything new to the table, right? They're just confirming what you already think. So it's very important to have people that do think differently. And some days, you have friends or people that do think like you, and you just want somebody who's gonna, stay in that zone with you when you're upset, miserable, going for the Haagen-Dazs ice cream, and that's okay, right? We all need those. But you also need that balance of difference so that you get a broader and a more enriched perspective.
And this is, what would you say to those people that might say, well, I don't know people that are different from me, and now with this remote working, I don't actually know people that I can consider potential mentors, and so they don't see the possibilities. What would you tell them? How would you invite them to act in order to get these 2 or 3 people that are powerful resources?
Do you know what? I think a lot of the time people have mentors and they don't know they have them. And I don't even think you have to label them. So I know people that I bounce ideas off. And if I sort of told them that I consider them a mentor, they would be surprised. So I don't think it has to be as formal as this person's my mentor. But there could be somebody in the office that you sit with who and when I say different, it doesn't have to be difference in cultures or difference in ethnicity or anything like that. It could just be somebody who maybe you're a very the glass is always half empty sort of person. You need somebody who's the glass is always half full, and you will be surrounded by those. So I don't think difference has to be extreme. I think difference just has to be somebody who doesn't replicate and think exactly like you. And to be honest, it's easy to find people who have very different perspectives, especially in the working place and also when you network. Because I tend to find that in academia, you tend to surround yourself with friends that think and act and want the same things as you do. But as you grow professionally, you are going to come across people who different skill sets, different life experiences. And those are the people that you can harness into and discuss things with you. And I also find that people actually enjoy sharing their perspectives. It's quite easy to find people who will tell you what they think, or you can bounce ideas off. And I think these things are a very natural thing. I don't think you should kind of stress yourself and think, I need a mentor, so tomorrow I'm going to go to the office and find that person, and they're going to. It's not even that. It may be that person who is slightly more senior than you are, that you bump into occasionally when you're going home or coming to the office, and maybe that's when you go and have coffee and talk to that person a little bit more and get some perspectives. And the more you have, the better, because like I say, it's all about broadening your network, broadening who you know. And I agree, COVID hasn't helped because we are remote working, but very few people are working remotely 100%. And I'm a strong believer in that your network is your net worth. So if you're ever going to make an effort anywhere in life, it's to network. So I think on that side of things, you shouldn't limit yourself to we're in Zoom, not we're working remotely land, so I'm going to isolate myself. No, there are opportunities to go into the office. There's opportunities to network. Make that something that you do, because I think networking is key.
That it is, and I would add or point out of what you said, that not formal doesn't need to be formal, as you say, and almost valuing and paying attention to the people around you more than you probably normally do, to actually find, as you said, that there are mentors that I don't even know that are there, right? And so refining our ability to pay attention, seeing, hearing the people that are working with us and they are part of our landscape, that is already a first step. This is, I understand from what you're saying, right? And I think that this becomes also extremely important for what you're saying next, right? The networking, because if I learn to actually see you and value who you are and what you're saying, and learn to appreciate you, that's also how I can then expand my network with people I actually can see.
Exactly. And you know people and they know people, and it's a multiplier effect. So please don't see that it's something that's an additional task. It should be something that's quite easy to develop. And even if you feel that you're not a natural networker, you only have to start with a small circle, and they know people, and the people that they know people, and that's really how these things grow organically.
Yeah, beautiful. And I have a couple of more questions for you, Emma. And the first one is, we often hear that there are obstacles for women and Black women in the path to leadership and in path of their career path. And we often find that we hear that men have advantages towards women, they have it easier, and sometimes they constitute some roadblocks. So I was just wondering if you had a chance to suggest something to your male colleagues, so that they, if they could change something or do something different or stop doing something that could help more women and women of color to advance in leadership, what would you invite them to do differently, if anything at all?
Be an ally. And consider the women in the room, the women of color in the room. Consider giving opportunities to people that look nothing like you. Consider if you're a team leader and there are people in your team who are marginalized or underrepresented, how do you support them? How do you amplify their voices? Lead by example. Show that you're inclusive, show that you're supportive, so that you're a natural person who believes that everybody belongs. That's what I'd ask.
And if they say, let's assume that you're having this conversation with a couple of colleagues of yours, and they go back to you and they say, well, we are doing all of these. And perhaps they are not, because they are not noticing, right, that they are not doing this. What would you invite them to pay more attention to in order to achieve everything that you have just mentioned?
I always say, it's funny, I do have this conversation quite a bit. I always say, challenge yourself. So we all have affinity biases. Everybody likes the things that they're familiar with, that look like them and they feel comfortable with. So next time you are making a decision, why don't you challenge yourself and say, well, rather than giving that job assignment to the person that looks exactly like me, let me try and give that assignment to somebody who doesn't look like me. If you look at the team that you lead, if everybody looks the same, why not consider the next time you make a hire, bringing somebody else who's completely different to you? And that's how I was position it to people, is to challenge yourself. Because unless you're sort of having this comfortable conversation of I'm doing everything right, I don't need to do anything else, nothing really changes. And if you want to be really dramatic, the world is changing. The world is looking very different to what it used to. And so if you're going to stay up, if you're going to keep up, if you're going to be in a sustainable world, you really need to foster inclusion. I mean, I don't need to sort of talk about the stats about how diversity improves business prospects and results and team building and all of that. But I would definitely say that challenge yourself and think about the long-term implications of your decisions, and also think about the sustainability of your behavior.
That's so powerful. And also, in order to do this, challenge yourself, look at long term, try and give it a chance to people that are outside your box, right? I think you didn't name this, you didn't mention it, but I bring it in. I think we need humility, right? To think that there are things that we do not know and we are not expert on, and things that we have not considered. You were humble when you decided to go to Japan, listen to the mentor, right? You gave yourself a chance, but you were humble in the process. So when you say I invite them to challenge themselves, what I say is you need to tune into being humble, because we need that as well if we want to create different kinds of connection and inclusivity. I think that's for
absolutely. And I would also add empathy as well. Humility and empathy. Yeah, absolutely.
Great combination. I have a last question for you, Emma. I don't recall if you have a daughter or a son or how many children you have, but if you had a daughter and you could give her just one piece of advice, just one, so that she can grow into being a woman of the 21st century, a Black woman in operating and making a difference in the 21st century, what would you suggest her to do, or what would you tell her? And if you had a son, what would you tell your son?
I would tell both of them the same thing. Believe in you. Because if you don't, nobody else will. Always believe in you. Always back you. Because you are your own champion. You are your own advocate. And you are your own supporter. So back you and believe in you. And I think I've mentioned this before. Don't self-edit. The amount of times I hear people say, well, I can't do this, or I'm not good enough, or I don't think I can do this, or I'm not sure. Don't self-edit, because the world is there to edit you, right? So you don't give them a starting chance. You apply, you go for things, you try things, and if they don't work, there's that learning lesson. And always there's a learning lesson for that. And then you move on and you consider the other things. But believe in you. Don't self-edit, and own your achievements. I think this is what I'd say to my daughter rather than to a son, is that own your own achievements. I'm still at my experience in life having to learn to be silent when people say that I've done a good job, because the natural inclination is to say, oh, anyone else could have done it. And now I just think, no, actually, I'm going to own that, and I've earned it. So really own the accolades, the success, the things that you've driven, because you've earned them. And this is where you don't have to be humble, right? This is when it's really fine to be proud of achievements and successes.
That is really awesome. That is really awesome. I am really so grateful that you have shared this wisdom and the lessons that you have learned, and that we now have the precious pearls that you have really shared. And thank you so much. Thank you really, Emma, for this time. And this conversation has been awesome. And we now, from this moment on, for everybody that is listening, we need to own our own achievement and success, and don't edit, because the world is the editor already, as Emma says. So thank you very much. How can people connect with you if they want to connect with you and reach you? What's the best way?
LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm not so much active on Twitter and whatnot, but LinkedIn definitely. I'm very happy to take questions and any feedback and any thoughts you have from this conversation. And I've really enjoyed it, Barbara. This is my first LinkedIn live, so it's nice to be with you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. It's really been a pleasure. So everybody, that's it. We have heard this amazing story of Amma, and we look forward to hear more from you. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.